Alright, so now that we understand about method, let's talk about return types. We see here, so let's look at how the method is constructed, per se, the syntax of method. So we have public, okay, we'll talk more about public and all that at a later time. With public, static, void, and then the name of the method. And depending whether we have a parameter, we're passing in some data, right? We'll have the type of data always. It's important to remember that. Always start with the type and then the name of the variable, in this case, right? Parameter. Now let's talk about return type. Well, a return type tells the system, tells Java, tells the compiler that the method we're talking about, whether it's going to return something, right? So we should expect something being returned from it or not. So when you say void, right, this keyword void means that the method in question is not going to return anything. There are times when we need to return, say, an integer. Return an integer. In this case, let's take the example that we have here, which is the add nums, right? So it's a method that adds two numbers and then shows the result. So this works fine, as we saw earlier, systeming out the sum of these two integers that we pass in, as we see here. So add numbers, we pass in 4 and 5, and we get 9, okay? But this method is still a void method, which means it really doesn't return anything. In order for us to make this method return something, because look, all this method needs to do is literally just take two numbers, whatever we pass in here, and add them, and then just return the result. So what we need to do here, we need to do a few things. First of all, we have to change the signature type, which means we need to tell the system, the compiler, that hey, this method here is not just void. This method will and should, it's a contract, return an integer. In this case, that's what we need. So we're going to say here int. Now, we have a problem here. If you have it over here, it says missing return type. Well, because it turns out if you say that you want to change this method to have a return, to return something, well, you better have an actual return statement here. Well, return, you just say return, and what are we going to return? We can say return A plus B. It's a statement, just close like that. Let's go and comment that out. Let's say something you probably haven't seen it. Okay, this may look very confusing. What are we doing here? Essentially, we're saying, well, it would have been the same if we had said something like this. Int result is equal to 0, okay? And then we say result is going to be equal to A plus B. And then we just take that result and we pass and we return like that. It's the same thing as doing A plus B. Let's just keep the way it is right now. Let's save this. Now, check this out. If we save and run, nothing's going to happen. And you may say, well, but we called it here. So it's add numbers, and there it is. And we have the result, but why isn't it showing? Well, the reason it's not showing, remember, is that now we've changed things. First of all, we did comment out the system that out, because now we're just returning the result, the integer, because again, we remember, the moment you say int as a type, then you have to return an integer. That's why we have here int result, and we initialize it to 0. Or we could just not have anything, but I like always to initialize it, okay? Either way. So now we know that int is going to be, result's going to be an integer, which is exactly what we need. So we are putting the addition, the sum of A plus B, which is exactly what we have passed here. So the sum is going to be into the result here variable, and then we're returning it, okay? Now, the reason why, again, going back, the reason why we're not seeing anything in our console here is because, well, we have to system it out, because now what's happening, we are just returning the value. We're not systeming it out. We're not showing it. So the value is there. It's just that we're not showing. The beauty here, we can actually now go ahead and say system that out, that println, and we can just pass this whole thing here inside here. Save this and run. Should have 9. And you may think, oh man, this is awesome, this is great. And it is amazing, because now you notice this whole thing here, it's returning the result. Which also means we could have done the following. We could have said, for instance, int final result is equal to add nums and pass in 4 and 5. Something like that. And then take this final result and just put it here. And run, we'll get the same result. You notice now we have this whole flexibility thing that we didn't have before. Because now we can literally knowing that the add nums is returning an integer, we could even go ahead here and say, check this out, say plus 10, because this is all an integer, right? That's what we said here. It's returning a plus b, which is coincidentally is an integer. Now we can actually take this whole result and add 10. If you save this, look what's going to happen. 19. Yes, because 4 plus 5 is 9, plus 10 is 19. We can keep adding. 45. Save, and there we go, and so forth. Right? So that's very helpful when we started to compartmentalize our code. Get rid of that. Save that. All right. Now, the same way we have this return an integer, right? The signature is an integer here. Well, the type of this method is an integer. We could do the same, obviously, you've seen that before. We can do the same with strings. Let me get rid of this. Get rid of this, so we got rid of that method. Okay, so now we can go ahead and return keep saying return string. So how would you do that? Say public static string. Yes, you guessed it. So it has to be string. And we're going to say, let's say full name. In this case, let's go ahead and pass a few parameters here because that's what we've been doing. Let's say then string. You're going to call first name. And I'm going to say string last name. Look at it again. We have an issue here. It says missing the return type. So what we can go ahead and do is say return. What do we want to do? We can just go straight to it and say first name, because that's what we're passing, plus we're concatenating, right, and say last name. Statement like that. Now I know that this full name is going to receive or pass in the first name and last name, so two strings, and then we're going to take those and put into a return statement here, and then we should see a concatenated first name and last name. So now we're going to call this full name here. Let's copy this and call it here, say full name, and right away tells us this method takes in two strings, first name and last name. Very, very helpful. So enter, and let's say here George the man, something like that. Now if we run this, we should see run nothing. Right, you guessed it. That means this, we're still returning everything, but we have to system out because this is just like a variable, right? It's all being returned in a single variable, so we have to system that out. So we can either go ahead and say system that out, that print ln, and then take all of that and put inside here. Save, run, we should see George the man. There we go. Okay, very nicely done. Very, very nice. And of course, you guessed it, you can do the same thing to other types here. We can go ahead and say, for instance, we want a char, a character. Okay, so say return, can return a character. So what do you know? So what do you do? Say public static char, my char. Say show char, something like that. And let's pass in, has to be char like that. Let's pass in a char, call it C. Okay, can say return C, something like that. Alright, so this is a type char. Now if you go show char, copy this, say system, not out, not print ln, we can say, so pass in some method, we have to pass in a, let's say, B. Right, so run, we should see B. If you want to change this to, let's say, D, run, we should see D. Alright, return types are amazing because now we are able to use them for with our methods, so to make sure they're a little bit more flexible and they do exactly what we want them to do. So we have, which is the idea of having a method, right? You want to create a method so that you have this chunk of code that does something and then returns something that we need to use somewhere, right? It could be that we are using this show char here in a different class or in a different other method somewhere. In fact, we are using in a different method, which is our main method, right? So But now if you forget about anything that we did, it looks much more organized and beautiful, right? Because now we know we just show char, we pass in D, and we know it's going to do exactly that. So we don't need to think of the implementation of show char, which means we can literally take all these methods here, put and send to somebody, and they don't need to know what really it's happening inside of a method, but they can use it because they know that this method here is called show char, and it needs to have some parameters. In this case, we pass an ID and does something. That's all. So again, we are abstracting. We're starting to abstract certain things as we code to make our code a little bit less messy and more flexible. Okay, and we'll see more as we talk about classes and other abstractions when it comes to Java programming. All right, oh great. So go ahead and play around with this, and as you know by now, there are many different types, right? Variable types or types in Java. So go ahead and use them. For instance, we use the void type method here. We use the integer. We use the string, so returns a string. We use a char, returns a character in this case. And we still have others such as boolean, right? So go ahead and work with those. Create a method that returns a boolean. Create another method that returns a float or a double, right? So the sky's the limit. So go ahead and experiment with all of that. Okay, great. Good job. I'll see you in the next video.